Brynn Keller was 27 years old when her three aunts cornered her in the kitchen with the kind of barely contained glee usually reserved for lottery winners, and announced that tonight, finally, she would meet the man they'd been scheming to introduce her to for weeks. "He's perfect," Aunt Margaret said, clasping her hands together. Her silver hair caught the afternoon light streaming through the window. "Absolutely distinguished," Aunt Claire added, adjusting her reading glasses with a satisfied nod. "And handsome beyond measure," Aunt Rosemary finished, practically vibrating with excitement. "You're meeting him at Rousseau's at 8. Brynn set down her coffee mug with deliberate care. Rousseau's was the most exclusive restaurant in the city, the kind of place that required reservations months in advance and had a dress code so strict they turned away celebrities in jeans. "What did you do?" "We simply mentioned to a very discreet agency that our lovely niece was available," Margaret said airily. "They handle arrangements for discerning individuals." "You signed me up for a matchmaking service." "An introduction service," Claire corrected. "Very elite, very selective." Brynn had lived with her three aunts since she was 19, since the car accident that took her parents and left her with a grief so heavy it had taken years to learn how to carry it. The aunts had descended on her dorm room like a force of nature, packed her belongings, and installed her in the sprawling Victorian house they shared. They'd fed her, fussed over her, given her space to heal, and never once made her feel like a burden. She loved them fiercely, which was the only reason she didn't immediately refuse. "I don't need help meeting people," she tried anyway. "Darling, you spend your days restoring antique books in a basement and your evenings reading," Rosemary said gently. "We adore you, but your social circle consists of us and the man who delivers your online orders." "His name is Paul, and he's very nice." "Paul is 63 and married," Margaret said. "Please, sweetheart, just this once. If it's dreadful, you never have to do it again." The three of them looked at her with such hope that Brynn felt her resistance crumble. They meant well. They always meant well. And maybe it would be nice to have dinner somewhere beautiful, even if the conversation proved tedious. "Fine," she said. "One dinner." The squealing that followed was loud enough to rattle the windows. 6 hours later, Brynn stood in front of her closet wrapped in a towel, her dark hair dripping down her back, and genuinely questioned her life choices. The aunts had already vetted and rejected 4 dress options. Claire was now holding up a deep blue silk gown that probably cost more than Brynn's monthly salary. "This one," Claire declared. "It brings out your eyes." Brynn's eyes were hazel, but she'd learned not to argue about color theory with Aunt Claire, who'd been a fashion buyer for 40 years. She took the dress and slipped it on. The silk whispered against her skin, cool and impossibly smooth. It fit perfectly, which shouldn't have surprised her because Claire had probably had it tailored weeks ago. "There," Margaret said, pinning Brynn's hair up in a loose knot that looked effortless and probably wasn't. "Beautiful." "You look like a princess," Rosemary breathed. Brynn looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the elegant woman staring back. The dress hugged her curves without being obvious about it. The deep blue made her skin seem to glow. Margaret had done something subtle with her hair that made her neck look longer. She looked like someone who belonged at Rousseau's. She looked like someone meeting a stranger might actually want to see. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Oh, honey," Rosemary pulled her into a hug. "You deserve something wonderful. Let yourself have this." The car service the aunts had arranged arrived at 7:30. Brynn kissed each of them goodbye and tried not to feel like she was going to her execution. The driver was professionally silent. The city lights blurred past the windows. She focused on breathing. Rousseau's occupied the ground floor of a historic building in the old quarter, all dark wood and low lighting, and the kind of quiet that money bought. The hostess greeted her by name and led her through the dining room to a private corner table. And there he was. The man rising from his chair was the most striking person Brynn had ever seen. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with a presence that seemed to command the space around him. His hair was pure white, swept back from his face in a way that should have looked old but instead looked otherworldly. His skin was pale, almost luminous in the candlelight, and his features were sharp and aristocratic. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than her car, and he moved with a grace that made her think of predators. His eyes, when they met hers, were a pale silver gray that seemed to see straight through her. "Brynn," he said, and his voice was deep and smooth and had an accent she couldn't place. Old European, maybe. Cultured. I'm Valerius Ashbourne. It's a pleasure. He extended his hand and she took it automatically. His fingers were cool against hers, his grip gentle but firm. He held her hand just a moment longer than necessary before releasing it and pulling out her chair. Thank you, she managed. Her heart was doing something complicated in her chest. I must confess, Valerius said as he settled back into his own seat, I've been looking forward to this evening with great curiosity. The description I was given suggested someone far more ordinary than the woman before me. Brynn felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm very ordinary. My aunts just dress me well. Your aunts. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. The ones who arranged this introduction? All three of them, yes. They're very enthusiastic about my love life, or lack thereof. Matchmaking seems to be a universal family pastime, Valerius said, though I'll admit this particular introduction came as something of a surprise. You didn't know what you were signing up for? I knew I was meeting someone. I did not expect it to feel quite so much like an ambush of good intentions. He smiled then, and it transformed his entire face from austere to genuinely warm. I find I rather enjoy it. The waiter appeared with menus and a wine list Valerius waved away, ordering something in flawless French that made the waiter's eyes widen appreciatively. When he left, Brynn leaned forward slightly. How did you end up with a matchmaking service? You don't seem like someone who needs help meeting people. Ah, Valerius considered his words. Let's say that my professional life is rather consuming, and the people I typically encounter are all connected to it in some way. The idea of meeting someone entirely separate from that world was appealing. What do you do? I manage a very old family business, estate holdings mostly, some investments. Quite dull, I'm afraid. He said it with the easy dismissiveness of someone who absolutely did not find it dull, and Brynn suspected there was far more to the story. But first dates were built on surfaces. She could work with surfaces. I restore books, she offered. Antique manuscripts, rare editions, anything that's falling apart and needs saving. His expression sharpened with interest. Truly, what sort of techniques do you use? And just like that, they were talking, really talking. Valerius asked questions that showed he actually understood book restoration, not just making polite conversation. He mentioned manuscripts he'd seen in his travels, museums and cities Brynn had only dreamed of visiting. His knowledge was vast and oddly specific. He knew about medieval binding methods and Renaissance paper composition and the particular challenges of repairing vellum. The food arrived in courses, each more exquisite than the last, though Brynn noticed Valerius barely touched his. He claimed he'd eaten earlier, and she was too engaged in the conversation to push. You must travel constantly, she said at one point, trying to imagine the life that allowed such extensive first-hand knowledge of European libraries and private collections. I do spend significant time abroad, he admitted, though lately I find myself wanting to stay in one place, build something more lasting than another business acquisition. There was something in his voice when he said it, a kind of loneliness that Brynn recognized. She'd felt it herself in the years after her parents died, that sense of being untethered, of moving through life without quite landing anywhere. My aunts would say that's exactly why you need someone to come home to, she said lightly. Your aunts sound wise. They're terrors, loving, well-intentioned terrors. Tell me about them. So she did. She talked about Margaret's garden and Claire's fashion obsession, and Rosemary's determination to feed everyone who entered the house. She talked about how they'd saved her after the accident, how they'd given her a home when she needed one most. She found herself telling him things she rarely shared with anyone, about the grief that still caught her sometimes, about the way books had become her refuge, and then her calling. Valerius listened with an intensity that should have been unnerving, but somehow wasn't. He asked questions that showed he was actually hearing her, not just waiting for his turn to talk. When she finally stopped, self-conscious about monopolizing the conversation, he reached across the table and took her hand. Thank you, he said quietly, for trusting me with that. His hand was still cool, but his touch was gentle. Brynn looked at their joined fingers and felt something shift in her chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Tell me something real about you, she said, not the polite first date version, something that matters. Valerius was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I am very old in the ways that matter. I have lived a certain kind of life for so long that I sometimes forget there are other ways to exist. Tonight, sitting here with you, I remember, and I find I don't want the evening to end. It wasn't what she expected, but it felt true. Brynn squeezed his hand. It doesn't have to, she said. Not yet. They left the restaurant just before midnight. The air outside was cool and clear, the kind of perfect autumn evening that made the city feel magical. Valerius offered his arm, and Brynn took it, letting him guide her down the quiet streets. I should get you home, he said, though he didn't sound like he wanted to. Walk with me first? Just for a little while? They walked. The city at night belonged to different people than the day version, softer and stranger. Valerius told her about buildings they passed, histories she'd never known, details that suggested he'd been in the city far longer than she'd assumed. She asked how long he'd lived here, and he said, quite some time, in a way that didn't invite follow-up questions. They ended up in a small park, one of those pocket gardens tucked between buildings that only locals knew about. There was a fountain in the center, old stone worn smooth by water and time. Brynn sat on the edge and Valerius settled beside her. I should tell you something, he said, before this goes any further. Brynn's stomach dropped. Here it was. The revelation, the girlfriend, the wife, the reason someone this compelling was available and using a matchmaking service. I'm listening, she said, keeping her voice steady. My life is complicated in ways that would be difficult to explain. There are obligations I can't simply walk away from, and people who have expectations about my choices. He turned to face her fully. If I pursue you, it will cause problems, significant ones. Are you married? No. Engaged? Promised to someone else? Not in any way that I recognize as binding. Brynn processed that. But other people think you are. Other people think I should be, that my position requires it. What position? Valerius smiled, and there was something sharp in it now, something that reminded her of the predator grace she'd noticed when they met. That, I'm afraid, is part of the complication. She should have been annoyed by the evasion. Instead, she found herself intrigued. There was clearly something unusual about Valerius Ashbourne, something beyond the obvious wealth and culture and otherworldly beauty. But he'd been nothing but kind to her, honest in his way. And he was giving her a choice. If you're not doing anything illegal or immoral, she said slowly, then I think I can handle complicated. You haven't seen complicated yet. Try me. He looked at her for a long moment, and Brynn had the sense of being evaluated, weighed against some internal measure she couldn't see. Then he reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his cool fingers gentle against her skin. You terrify me a little, he admitted. Do you know that? I'm a book restorer who lives with her aunts. What's terrifying about that? You make me want ordinary things. I haven't wanted ordinary things in a very long time. Brynn's breath caught. She leaned into his touch without meaning to, drawn by something she didn't have words for. Maybe ordinary isn't such a bad thing. No, Valerius said softly. Perhaps it isn't. He kissed her then, a question more than a claim, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Brynn didn't pull away. She kissed him back, tasting night air and something faintly mineral, like stone or cold water. His mouth was cool against hers, but the kiss was anything but. It was careful and intense and full of leashed wanting. When they finally broke apart, Brynn was breathing hard and Valerius looked almost stunned. I should definitely get you home now, he said, voice rough, before I forget how to be civilized. Brynn laughed, giddy and breathless. Would that be so bad? You have no idea. But he stood and offered his hand, and she took it, and they walked back through the quiet streets to where his car waited. It was, predictably, something sleek and expensive and probably vintage. He drove her home with one hand on the wheel and one hand holding hers. When they pulled up in front of the Victorian house, every light on the ground floor was blazing. Valerius looked at the house and then at Brynn with an expression of pure amusement. I take it your aunts are waiting up. They're probably watching from the window. Would you like me to walk you to the door? Prove my honorable intentions? Brynn considered. Actually, yes, if you're willing to face the Inquisition. I've faced worse. She believed him. The door opened before they reached it, and all three aunts spilled out onto the porch in their nightgowns and robes, utterly shameless in their curiosity. Valerius took it in stride, inclining his head in a gesture that seemed oddly formal, but somehow appropriate. Ladies, he said warmly, I'm Valerius Ashbourne. I had the pleasure of your niece's company this evening. Oh, he has an accent, Rosemary whispered loudly. Gorgeous, Claire breathed. Margaret, the most practical of the three, stepped forward and looked Valerius up and down with the assessing gaze of someone who'd raised 5 children and didn't suffer fools. You treated her well? I tried to be worthy of the company, Valerius said, and the sincerity in his voice made Margaret's expression soften. Will we see you again? If Brynn allows it, yes, I very much hope so. All three aunts looked at Brynn expectantly. She fought the urge to die of embarrassment and managed a nod. I'd like that. The aunts looked like they might actually burst with triumph. Valerius, to his credit, maintained his composure. He took Brynn's hand, pressed a kiss to her knuckles, in a gesture that should have been absurdly old-fashioned, but just felt right, and met her eyes. Tomorrow? He asked quietly. Dinner again, somewhere less formal? Or just a walk? A walk? Brynn said. Come by at 7? I'll be here. He nodded to the aunts, returned to his car with that same liquid grace, and drove away into the night. The moment his taillights disappeared, all three aunts grabbed Brynn and dragged her inside. Tell us everything, Margaret demanded. Was he wonderful? Rosemary asked. Did he kiss you? Claire wanted to know. Brynn sank onto the sofa and let herself smile, really smile, for the first time in longer than she could remember. Yes, she said, to all of it, yes. The aunts celebrated like they'd personally orchestrated a royal wedding, and honestly, watching their joy, Brynn couldn't bring herself to be anything but grateful. Whatever happened next, tonight had been perfect, and tomorrow she'd see him again. She fell asleep that night thinking about cool fingers and a careful kiss in eyes like winter storms. Valerius returned to his residence as the clock struck 2, entering through the private access that led directly to the subterranean levels most of the city didn't know existed. The sprawling complex beneath the historic building served as both his home and the seat of his power. Here, in chambers carved from bedrock and lined with stone older than the city above, he ruled the vampire courts of the Eastern Territories. He was still thinking about Brynn's smile when his seneschal appeared in the doorway, looking more agitated than Valerius had seen him in decades. Sire, Caspian said, his own white hair disheveled, his formal court attire replaced by something approaching casual, which meant the situation was dire. We have a problem. Valerius removed his jacket and draped it over a chair. Define problem. The council has learned about your evening. They're convening an emergency session. That got Valerius's attention. How did they learn anything? I used the matchmaking service precisely because it was discreet. Someone was watching. Dmitri, probably. He has people everywhere. Caspian paced, agitated. They know you met with a human woman. They know you intend to see her again. And they are not pleased. Valerius felt something cold and dangerous unfold in his chest. My personal life is not subject to council approval. Your marriage negotiations with the Western Territories are. Sire, you know the situation. The alliance has been in the works for 5 years. The treaty requires your bonding with the Lady Seraphina. If you pursue a human woman now, you'll be seen as abandoning the accord. I never agreed to that bonding. You allowed negotiations to proceed. In vampire politics, that's tantamount to agreement. Caspian stopped pacing and faced him directly. They will fight you on this, all of them. Even those normally loyal to you won't support throwing away a territorial alliance for a human you met once. Valerius sat down slowly, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. He'd ruled the Eastern Territories for 3 centuries. He'd survived court intrigue that had killed kings before him. He'd built his power base through strategy and strength and carefully maintained alliances. He knew exactly what he was risking. He also knew he didn't care. I'm going to see her again tomorrow, he said quietly, and the day after that, and every day she'll allow me. Sire, I have spent 300 years doing what was required for the good of our people. I have negotiated and compromised and set aside my own wishes for the sake of stability. I married once for duty, and she died hating me for it. I will not do it again." Caspian's expression was anguished. "Then what do you propose?" "The council will demand an audience. They'll cite treaty law. If you refuse the Serafina bonding, the Western Territories may declare it an insult worth going to war over. Then I'll deal with the Western Territories and the council." Valerius stood. "Schedule the session for tomorrow night. I'll hear their objections and make my position clear. Which is that I am their king, not their puppet, and I will court whom I choose." Caspian looked like he wanted to argue further, but clearly thought better of it. "As you wish, sire. Though for what it's worth, I think this is going to be harder than you anticipate. Most worthwhile things are." After Caspian left, Valerius stood alone in his chambers and thought about the human woman with hazel eyes who made him laugh, who'd shared her grief and her joy with equal honesty, who kissed like she meant it. Worth it, he thought. Whatever comes, she's worth it. The council chamber was a vast circular space deep beneath the city, carved from living rock and lit by hundreds of candles that never seemed to burn down. 13 vampires sat in high-backed chairs arranged in a semicircle, each representing a different faction or bloodline within the Eastern Territories. They were all old, all powerful, and all currently furious with their king. Valerius entered the chamber in full formal attire, black and silver that marked him as ruler, and took his place at the center of the semicircle. He did not sit. Kings did not sit when addressing subordinates, even ones as powerful as these. Lord Dmitri spoke first, his voice cold and sharp. He was ancient even by vampire standards, his white hair braided with silver cord, his face sharp as a blade. "You attended a meeting arranged by a human matchmaking service with a human woman, while bonding negotiations with the West are at a critical stage." "I did," Valerius agreed pleasantly. "Have you lost your mind?" This from Lady Morgaine, her pale eyes blazing. "Do you understand what you've risked?" "I understand perfectly." "The Lady Serafina is prepared to accept the bonding," Lord Alexandru said, his tone attempting diplomacy. "The Western Territories have agreed to open their borders, share resources. This alliance would strengthen both courts considerably. All that remains is your formal acceptance." "Which I will not be giving." The chamber erupted. 13 vampires began speaking at once, their voices rising in anger and disbelief. Valerius let the storm rage for a moment, then raised one hand. Silence fell instantly. "I have led you for 3 centuries," he said quietly. "In that time, these territories have prospered. We have peace with the South, trade agreements with the North, and enough power that no one dares challenge us directly. I have earned the right to make my own choices in this." "You've earned the responsibility to put your people first," Dmitri shot back. "This isn't about your personal preferences. This is about the good of the entire Eastern Court." "And what good is served by a king bonded to someone he doesn't choose? I was married once for political expediency. It was a disaster. She was miserable, I was miserable, and it solved none of the problems it was meant to address." "That was different," Morgaine said. "You were younger, less seasoned. I was dutiful, and I paid for it in decades of regret. I won't do it again." Alexandru leaned forward. "Then what do you propose regarding the Western Territories? We can't simply abandon the negotiations. We can offer other terms. Trade concessions, military support if they face external threats. A dozen things that don't require me to bond myself to someone I've never met for the sake of appearances." "It's not about appearances," Dmitri said flatly. "It's about trust. Bloodline bondings create ties that can't be broken. They ensure both sides have skin in the game. Economics and military promises can be renegotiated. Family cannot. Then perhaps it's time we found better foundations for trust than forced marriages." "Sire?" The voice came from the back of the chamber. Lady Seraphine, one of the quieter council members, rarely spoke but commanded respect when she did. "If I may, what is it about this human woman that makes you willing to risk so much?" Valerius considered the question. "She makes me want to be someone other than a king. She sees me as simply a man. And in 3 hours of conversation, she gave me more genuine connection than I've had in decades of court politics. She's human, Dmitri said, as if that ended the discussion. She'll age and die in the span of a few breaths. What kind of foundation is that? A honest one. This is absurd. Morgaine stood. Sire, I have supported you through every challenge, every conflict. But I cannot support this. You're throwing away a strategic alliance for an infatuation that will burn out before the season changes. Then, you underestimate both my judgment and my feelings. You've known her one evening, and I intend to know her for many more. That is not subject to debate. The council members looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them. Valerius recognized it. They were considering their options, considering whether he'd crossed a line from eccentric leadership into actual irresponsibility, considering whether it was time to challenge his rule. He met their gazes steadily, let them see his resolve. He would not back down. Could not. Finally, Alexandru spoke. Then we request a compromise, sire. Continue your courtship of the human if you must, but do not refuse the Western territories outright. Give us time to explore alternative arrangements to see if we can salvage the alliance without requiring your bonding. If we succeed, you're free to pursue the human without political consequence. If you fail, I still pursue her. But I'll make a good faith effort not to insult the West in the process. It wasn't what they wanted, but it was more than they'd had a moment ago. The council members conferred briefly, then nodded. 6 months, Dmitri said. We'll need at least that long to negotiate new terms. 6 months, Valerius agreed. And in the meantime, you'll be discreet? No public appearances with the human, nothing that would reach Western ears and be interpreted as a slight? I'll court her, not parade her, but I won't hide her either. More silent communication among the council. Then, reluctantly, they agreed. After the session ended and the council members filed out, Caspian appeared at Valerius's side. That could have gone worse. It's not over. Dmitri will use the 6 months to make my life as difficult as possible. He'll hope I tire of complications and give in. Will you? Valerius thought of Brynn's laugh, her careful honesty, the way she'd trusted him with her grief. No. Then I hope she's worth the war you're starting. So do I. Brynn spent the next day in a state of distracted anticipation that made focusing on work nearly impossible. She was currently repairing a 17th century religious text whose spine had completely disintegrated. It required delicate attention and a steady hand. She kept thinking about cool fingers and careful kisses instead. You're smiling at the book, her co-worker Marcus observed from his own restoration table. Either that manuscript is much more entertaining than it looks, or last night went well. Brynn startled. Sorry, I'll focus. Don't apologize, I've never seen you this happy. Who is he? His name is Valerius. We met for dinner. And? And he's interesting and strange, and I'm seeing him again tonight. Marcus grinned. Strange how? I don't know exactly. There's something about him that's unusual. Like he's from a different time or something. She paused. That sounds ridiculous. It sounds like you like him. Is he good to you? So far, yes. Then the rest is details. Brynn returned to her work, trying to maintain focus. But her mind kept drifting. She found herself wondering where Valerius lived, what his days looked like, whether he was thinking about her too. The questions felt adolescent and thrilling at once. The day crept by. She finished the manuscript repair, logged her hours, cleaned her tools. By the time she made it home, it was past 5 and she had less than 2 hours to get ready. The aunts were waiting with another dress, this one more casual but still beautiful, a deep green that Claire declared perfect for autumn. They did her hair again, simpler this time. Margaret made her eat something so she wouldn't be hungry. Rosemary gave her a small silver bracelet that had belonged to Brynn's mother. For luck, Rosemary said, fastening it around Brynn's wrist. Brynn felt her throat tighten. Thank you. We just want you happy, sweetheart. I know. Valerius arrived exactly at 7, this time on foot. He wore dark trousers and a gray sweater that somehow made his pale coloring even more striking. The aunts ushered him inside immediately, offering tea and cookies and a barrage of questions. How long have you lived in the city? Quite some time. I'm fond of the history here. What do your parents do? They've been gone a long while, I'm afraid. Oh, we're so sorry. It was long ago, but thank you. And you run an estate business? Among other holdings, yes. He answered their questions with patient charm, but Brynn saw the way his attention kept tracking to her, like he was aware of exactly where she was in the room at every moment. After 15 minutes of interrogation, Brynn rescued him. We should go before they decide to come with us. We wouldn't intrude, Margaret said, though her tone suggested she'd absolutely considered it. Valerius inclined his head to the aunts. Thank you for welcoming me. Your niece is lucky to have you. They practically glowed. Brynn grabbed her coat and escaped before anyone could suggest a chaperone. Outside, the evening was cool and clear, the kind of perfect autumn night that made everything feel possible. Valerius offered his arm, and she took it, and they walked. I'm sorry about them, Brynn said. They mean well, but they can be intense. They're wonderful. I meant what I said. You're fortunate. Where's your family? Gone, as I said. It's been many years. Any siblings? None living. There was a weight to the words, an old grief he carried easily but still carried. Brynn squeezed his arm. I'm sorry. Thank you. But truly, it was long ago. I've made peace with it. They walked through neighborhoods Brynn knew, and some she didn't, Valerius guiding them with the ease of someone who'd walked these streets countless times. He showed her tucked-away courtyards and old architecture she'd never noticed, told her stories about buildings and their histories, details that weren't in any guidebook. How do you know all this? She asked at one point. I've always been interested in history, and I've had considerable time to explore. You talk like you're ancient. He gave her a sideways look that might have been amusement. Perhaps I am. What are you, 40? Close enough. But there was something evasive in the answer, and Brynn filed it away with all the other small mysteries. He seemed young in some ways, old in others, moved like an athlete, but spoke like a scholar. Had the resources of someone extremely wealthy, but none of the arrogance she associated with old money. They ended up at a small cafe tucked into a side street, the kind of place that served excellent coffee and homemade pastries and never advertised. Valerius held the door for her, and they found a table in the back. Do you drink coffee? Brynn asked, suddenly realizing she'd never seen him consume anything except a few bites at the restaurant. Not typically, but I enjoy the atmosphere of places like this. Why don't you eat much? Are you one of those people who forgets meals when they're focused on work? Valerius was quiet for a moment. Something like that. I have an unusual diet, medical condition. Oh, I'm sorry. Is it serious? Manageable. I've lived with it a long time. Brynn ordered coffee and a pastry. Valerius requested tea he didn't drink. They talked about books and travel and the ways cities changed over decades. Valerius had opinions about urban development that suggested he'd watched it happen in real time. He mourned the loss of old buildings, celebrated the rare instances of preservation. You should meet my boss, Brynn said. He runs the restoration house. He's obsessed with keeping the past alive. I'd like that. Perhaps you could show me where you work sometime? You want to see me repair book spines? I want to see you in your element, doing what you love. The sincerity in his voice made her chest tight. Tomorrow? I could give you a tour after work. I'd have to be evening. I keep unusual hours. That works. I'm usually there late anyway. They talked until the cafe closed, then walked some more. The city at night felt like it belonged to them alone. Valerius told her about places he'd traveled, and Brynn shared her dreams of seeing the great libraries of Europe someday. He promised to take her, said it as if it were settled fact rather than wishful thinking. You don't even know if we'll make it past next week, Brynn teased. I know. He said it with absolute certainty. When he walked her home, the house was dark. The aunts had finally given them privacy. On the porch, Brynn turned to face him and found him watching her with that same intensity from the night before. I had a wonderful time, she said, as did I. He reached up, cupped her face with one cool palm. Brynn, I need to tell you something. Her heart skipped. Okay. My life is more complicated than I've let on. There are people who believe they have a say in my personal choices, and they're not pleased that I'm courting you. Are these the same people who think you should be promised to someone else? Yes, they're going to make things difficult. I want you to know that now, before this goes any further. Brynn covered his hand with hers. Are you warning me off? No, I'm asking if you're willing to deal with difficult. She thought about it, about how strange he was, how evasive, about the wealth and the odd hours and the way he moved like something more than human. Any sensible person would ask more questions, would demand clarity before getting involved. But she'd spent years being sensible and safe, and it had gotten her exactly nowhere. Valerius made her feel alive in a way nothing else had since her parents died. Whatever secrets he was keeping, she wanted the chance to learn them. "I can deal with difficult," she said, "as long as you're honest with me when it matters." "I will be, I promise." He kissed her then, slower and deeper than before. And Brynn let herself fall into it. His mouth was cool and demanding and careful all at once, like he was holding himself back. She pressed closer and felt him shudder. When they broke apart, his eyes had darkened to something like storm clouds. "I should go before I forget how to be civilized." "You said that before. It's more true every time I see you." "Is that a bad thing?" "Not for me. Possibly for you." But he smiled as he said it, and kissed her forehead, and stepped back. "Tomorrow evening, show me your work. I'll meet you there at 6. I'll send you the address." She gave him her phone number, and he entered it into a device that looked expensive and vaguely European. Then he was walking away into the dark, moving with that predator grace, and Brynn stood on the porch until he disappeared. Inside, she found a note from the aunts on the kitchen table. "We're trusting you to tell us everything at breakfast. Sleep well, darling." She fell asleep, smiling. The next evening, Brynn gave Valerius a tour of the Restoration House, a converted warehouse in the old industrial district. The main floor held dozens of workstations, each equipped for different types of repair. The environmental controls kept temperature and humidity perfect for preservation. It smelled like old paper and leather and the faint chemical tang of archival adhesives. Valerius moved through the space like he was in a cathedral. He examined tools with genuine interest, asked questions that showed real understanding. When Brynn showed him the manuscript she was currently repairing, he bent close and studied the damaged spine with careful attention. 17th century? He asked. "Good eye." 1640, we think. Someone tried to repair it before and used the wrong adhesive, made it worse. "How long will the restoration take?" "Another week, maybe. It's delicate work." He straightened and looked at her, something warm in his expression. "You love this." "I do. There's something about taking something broken and making it whole again, preserving it for another few centuries." "I understand that impulse." They were standing close, the lighting dim and intimate. Brynn felt the pull between them like a physical thing. She started to move closer, and Valerius caught her waist, stopping her. "We're in your workplace," he said softly. "I won't compromise your professionalism." "There's no one else here." "Even so." But he didn't let go, and she could feel the tension in his grip, like he was holding himself in check. It thrilled her more than it should have. "Come to dinner at my house Friday," she said impulsively. "The aunts want to feed you properly. They're dying to show off their cooking." "Are you sure you want me around your family again so soon?" "They adore you, and I want you there." "Then I'd be honored." He kissed her before he left, there in the quiet of the Restoration House, and Brynn felt like she was being marked somehow, claimed. It should have been frightening. Instead, it felt exactly right. Friday arrived with the aunts in a state of culinary fervor. They'd been cooking since dawn, preparing enough food to feed 20 people. The dining room table was set with the good china, candles burned in silver holders, fresh flowers in a crystal vase. "It's just dinner," Brynn protested as Claire adjusted the napkin placement for the third time. "It's the first time we're properly entertaining your young man," Margaret corrected. "These things matter." "He's not my young man yet." All three aunts gave her identical looks that suggested she was fooling no one. Valerius arrived at 7 with flowers for the aunts and wine that probably cost more than Brynn's monthly rent. He fit into their home like he'd always belonged there, charming and attentive and unfailingly polite. He complimented the food, even though Brynn noticed he mostly moved it around his plate rather than eating, claimed he'd had a late lunch. The aunts grilled him gently over dinner. Where had he grown up? Europe, mostly. How had he built his business? Carefully and over considerable time. Did he have plans to settle permanently in the city? He was beginning to think so. "And what are your intentions toward our niece?" Rosemary asked, direct as always. Rosemary, Brynn protested, but Valerius just smiled. Honorable ones. I'd like to continue seeing her if she'll have me. I find her remarkable. He thinks you're remarkable, Claire whispered to Brynn, way too loudly. After dinner, Valerius helped clear the table over the aunt's protests. Brynn walked him to the door eventually, giving them a moment of relative privacy in the hallway. Thank you for subjecting yourself to that, she said. I enjoyed it. Your family is wonderful. They're already planning the wedding. Are they? He didn't sound alarmed by the prospect. Doesn't that scare you? Should it? Brynn looked at him, at the certainty in his expression, and felt something inside her shift. We've known each other less than a week. I'm aware. I'm also aware that I haven't felt this way about anyone in longer than you'd believe. So no, the thought of a future with you doesn't scare me. It's the first thing that's felt right in years. She kissed him then, reaching up and pulling him down to her, and felt him respond with gratifying intensity. His hands framed her face, his kiss deep and demanding and still so carefully controlled. When they broke apart, breathless, Valerius rested his forehead against hers. Come to my home tomorrow night. Let me show you my world. I'd like that. There are things I need to tell you, things you deserve to know before this goes further. About the complications. Yes? Brynn traced his jaw with her fingers, feeling the sharp bone structure beneath cool skin. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. You're trusting. I'm choosing to trust you. There's a difference. He kissed her again, quick and fierce, and then stepped back before things could escalate further. Tomorrow, 7 o'clock, I'll send a car. You don't have to do that. Humor me. The area can be difficult to find. The car that arrived Saturday evening was a sleek black vehicle with tinted windows and a driver who looked like he could double as security. Brynn felt slightly ridiculous in her casual clothes, but Valerius had said to dress comfortably, so she had. The drive took them to the old quarter, then down streets that got progressively narrower and quieter. Finally, they pulled up in front of a historic building that looked like it might have been a mansion once, then a hotel, then something else entirely. The architecture was elegant and vaguely menacing at once. The driver opened her door and gestured to the entrance. Valerius was waiting in the foyer, dressed in all black that made him look even paler than usual. His smile when he saw her was genuine and warm. You came. Of course I came. He took her hand and led her inside. The building was extraordinary, all dark wood and stone, soaring ceilings and old-world craftsmanship, antique furniture that looked original rather than reproduction, art on the walls that Brynn suspected was actually valuable rather than just decorative. This is yours? She asked. I own the building, yes. I keep the upper floors leased as apartments. I live below. Below? He guided her to what looked like a service elevator, old brass and still operated manually. They descended, and Brynn watched the floors tick past. Ground, basement, sub-basement, further. How far down do you live? She asked, slightly nervous now. Far enough for privacy. The elevator stopped finally, and opened onto a space that stole Brynn's breath. It was a vast chamber carved from living stone, the walls smooth and ancient, lit by hundreds of candles, and what looked like actual torches in iron sconces. Furniture that belonged in a castle, tapestries on the walls, books everywhere, floor to ceiling in some places. It was beautiful and strange and utterly unlike anywhere she'd ever been. This is where you live? This is one part of it. My private residence is through there. He gestured to an archway. But I wanted to show you this first. This is the old throne room. Brynn turned to him slowly. Throne room. Valerius took a breath. I told you I needed to be honest with you. This is me being honest. I'm not simply a businessman, Brynn. I'm a king. A vampire king. The words hung in the air between them. Brynn stared at him, waiting for the punchline, the explanation that would make it make sense. He just looked back at her steadily. You're serious, she said finally. Completely. Vampires are real. Yes. And you're one of them. I am. Have been for over 300 years. Brynn sat down abruptly on the nearest piece of furniture, which turned out to be a very old and probably priceless chair. Her mind was racing, trying to fit this new information into everything she knew about Valerius. The pale skin, the cool touch, the way he barely ate. The odd hours and the strange wealth and the sense that he was from another time, it actually made a horrifying kind of sense. "You drink blood," she heard herself say. "Yes, from volunteers, typically. I don't kill. I haven't in a very long time. But you have killed." "In my early years, yes, before I learned better, before I built the laws that govern our kind now." Brynn looked around the throne room, really seeing it now, the age of it. The power implied in every stone. You rule vampires. What does that mean? It means I maintain order among my kind in the Eastern Territories. I negotiate with other vampire courts, enforce our laws, protect our people from exposure and from hunters. It's complicated and often tedious and occasionally violent. And the people who think you should be bonded to someone else are my court counsel. They've negotiated a political alliance with the Western Territories that would be sealed by my marriage to another vampire, a Lady Seraphina who I've never met and have no interest in bonding with. Because of me. Because I want to choose my own life. You've just given me a reason worth fighting for. Brynn processed this, her mind working through implications. If you marry this Seraphina person, it's a political thing. No feelings involved. Correct. But if you don't marry her, there could be political consequences, maybe even violence. Possibly. Yes. My counsel is trying to negotiate alternative terms. How long have you been fighting them about this? The council session was the night after I met you. I've been refusing them since. Brynn stood and walked a slow circle around the throne room, needing to move. This was insane. Vampires weren't real. Except apparently they were, and she was in one's throne room having a conversation about vampire politics. "Wow, why me?" she asked finally. "You're 300 years old, a king. You could have anyone. Why someone so ordinary that her aunts had to use a matchmaking service to get her a date?" Valerius moved closer but didn't touch her, giving her space. "Because you're not ordinary. You're honest and kind, and you looked at me like I was just a man. Not a king, not a political tool, just a person. Do you know how rare that is for me? Everyone in my world wants something, power or protection or advancement. You just wanted good conversation and maybe a second date. It was the most real thing I've experienced in decades. I'm human. I'll age and die. I'm aware. So what's your plan here? Date me for a few decades and then watch me die? I'm hoping you'll choose to be turned. But that's your choice, Brynn. Yours alone. I won't pressure you." She looked at him, this impossible, beautiful creature who'd walked into her life less than 2 weeks ago and upended everything. "This is crazy. I know. I should be running. Probably. Are you going to hurt me?" "Never by choice. I will protect you with everything I have." Brynn searched his face, looking for lies or manipulation. She found only sincerity and something that might have been fear. He was afraid she'd reject him. The vampire king was afraid of her walking away. It was absurd and endearing and completely terrifying. "I need time," she said, "to process this, to figure out what I think. Of course, take whatever time you need. Can you take me home?" Something flickered across his expression, too fast to name, but he nodded. "Of course." The drive back was quiet. Valerius didn't try to fill the silence or convince her. He just sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the coolness radiating from his skin. At her door, she turned to him. "I'm not saying no. I'm just saying I need to think." "I understand." He took her hand, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. But I hope you'll give us a chance." "I'll call you," she promised. Inside, the aunts were waiting up. They took one look at her face and sat her down with tea and waited. "He told me what he really is," Brynn said finally. "And it's a lot." "Is he a criminal?" Margaret asked. "No." "Is he cruel?" "I don't think so." "Then whatever it is, it's just information. What matters is how you feel." Brynn cupped the warm mug in her hands and thought about that. How did she feel? Frightened, definitely, overwhelmed, but also thrilled in a way she couldn't quite name. Valerius had trusted her with the truth, had shown her his world, knowing she might reject him. That took courage, and he'd been nothing but kind to her, protective, honest in his way. "I think I'm falling for him," she admitted. "Is that crazy?" Only if you don't trust what you're feeling, Rosemary said gently. Your heart knows things your head doesn't. What if this ends badly? What if it doesn't? Claire countered. You can't live your whole life afraid of pain, sweetheart. Sometimes you have to risk it for the chance at something wonderful. Brynn thought about that long into the night. About risk and trust in the way Valerius had looked at her in his throne room, like she held his entire future in her hands. She called him the next evening. Can I see you? Always. Should I come to you? No, I'll come there. Can you send the car? He did. This time, when she descended into the stone chambers, Valerius was waiting in what looked like a sitting room, less formal than the throne room, but still stunning. Books and art and furniture that spoke of centuries of accumulation. He stood when she entered, tension in every line of his body. Brynn. I've been thinking, she said without preamble, about what you told me, about what this means. And I have questions. I'll answer anything you want to know. So she asked. About vampire laws and blood consumption and the court politics he navigated, about what turning meant, what she'd lose and gain, about his history and his family and the 300 years he'd lived before they met. He answered everything honestly, even the uncomfortable parts. Yes, he'd killed when he was young and newly turned. Yes, it haunted him. Yes, being immortal meant watching everyone he cared about die eventually. Yes, he still thought it was worth it if she chose to stay. Why? Brynn asked. We barely know each other. I know enough. I know you're brave and kind, and you make me remember what it's like to want something just for myself. That's enough to build on. Your court might fight you over me. Let them. The political alliance could fall apart. I'll negotiate a new one. I might not choose to turn. I might stay human and age and leave you alone again. Then I'll treasure however long I have you. Brynn looked at this impossible man with his white hair and storm-cloud eyes and felt something settle in her chest. She was terrified. But she also knew, with the kind of bone-deep certainty that couldn't be argued with, that she wanted to try. Okay, she said. He blinked. Okay? I want to keep seeing you. I want to see where this goes. I'm not promising to turn, not yet, but I'm not walking away. The relief on his face was almost painful to see. He crossed to her in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was something precious. Thank you. Thank you. Brynn wrapped her arms around him and let herself feel it, the coolness of his skin, the carefully controlled strength. This was real. This was happening. She was dating a vampire king, and it was terrifying and exciting and completely insane. She wouldn't have it any other way. The next weeks fell into a rhythm. Brynn worked during the day, restored manuscripts, and lived her normal life. In the evenings, Valerius would arrive after dark, and they'd walk or talk or simply exist together. He showed her more of his world, introduced her to Caspian, who was polite and clearly worried, took her through parts of the city she'd never seen. The aunts adjusted with remarkable grace once Brynn told them the truth. Margaret wanted to know about vampire dietary needs. Claire was fascinated by immortal fashion evolution. Rosemary just wanted to make sure Valerius would treat Brynn well. He's a little unusual, Rosemary said diplomatically. That's one word for it, Brynn agreed. They didn't make love, though the tension built between them every time they were alone. Valerius maintained iron control, always stopping before things went too far. I don't want to rush you, he said one evening when they had been kissing in his chambers and he'd pulled back, breathing hard. This is your choice. I want you to be sure. I am sure. Not about turning, about me. So she showed him, took his face in her hands and kissed him with all the certainty she felt, and felt him shudder against her. Brynn, he said roughly, I'm sure about you. Everything else we can figure out later. He made love to her that night with a kind of fierce reverence that left her breathless. He was careful and demanding by turns, cool skin against her warmth, immortal strength held in perfect check. And when she fell asleep in his arms after, wrapped in silk sheets in a bed older than America, she felt safer than she had in years. But the court politics were getting worse. Valerius came to her 3 weeks into their relationship with tension written all over him. The Western territories are losing patience, he said. They consider my refusal of the bonding an insult. There have been border incidents, nothing violent yet, but it's escalating. What do they want? Me to honor the original agreement, or barring that, a significant concession. Territory, resources, something that shows good faith. What have you offered? Everything except the bonding. It's not enough. Brynn sat with that information. What happens if you just refuse? If you tell them the alliance is off? Best case, a cold peace with increased border tensions for decades. Worst case, actual war. Over you refusing a political marriage. Over me refusing and choosing a human instead. That's the part they find insulting. If I'd refused for another vampire, they'd be annoyed. But choosing a human over one of their nobility, that's a slight they take personally. Brynn felt cold. So I'm the problem. No, he gripped her shoulders. Their wounded pride is the problem. You are not responsible for vampire political nonsense. But she could see the strain in him, the weight of 3 centuries of responsibility warring with what he wanted for himself. He was going to tear himself apart over this. What if I met with them? She said suddenly. Valerius stared at her. Absolutely not. Why not? I'm the human they're so offended by. Let me talk to them. Explain that this isn't some political slight. It's just 2 people choosing each other. Brynn, these are ancient vampires with very little patience for humans. It could be dangerous. So come with me, protect me, but let me try. He looked like he wanted to argue further, but she could see him considering it. Finally, reluctantly, he nodded. I'll see if they'll agree to a meeting, but at the first sign of disrespect or danger, we leave. Understood? Understood. The Western Territories agreed to the meeting with what Caspian described as bemused condescension. They sent a delegation to the Eastern Court, led by the Lady Seraphina herself. Brynn met them in the throne room with Valerius at her side. There were 5 of them, all white-haired and pale and beautiful in that unsettling vampire way. Lady Seraphina stood in the center, tall and regal in a gown that looked medieval and probably was. So, Seraphina said, her voice cool and measuring, this is the human who has caused such disruption. I'm Brynn Keller, Brynn said, proud that her voice stayed steady. I understand you're upset about King Valerius's choice. Upset is a mild term. Seraphina circled her slowly, assessing. I was promised a bonding to secure our territory's alliance. Instead, I'm told the king prefers a mortal. It's unexpected. I didn't ask him to refuse you. I didn't even know about the arrangement when we met. And yet, here you are, disrupting centuries of careful diplomacy. Brynn felt Valerius tense beside her, but pressed on. I don't want to disrupt anything. I certainly don't want to cause a war. But I'm not going to walk away from him either. How noble and temporary. You're human. You'll be dead in a few decades regardless. Maybe. Or maybe I'll choose to turn. But that's between Valerius and me. Seraphina stopped circling and faced her directly. You're brave, I'll grant you that. Foolish, but brave. What exactly do you think you can offer a vampire king? Brynn met her gaze. The same thing anyone can offer anyone else. Honest affection, trust, the chance to be chosen for who he is, not what he can provide politically. How romantic. The word dripped with disdain. And when your romance fades, when you're old and he's still unchanged, what then? Then we'll deal with it. Together. Seraphina studied her for a long moment, then surprised Brynn by smiling. It wasn't particularly warm, but it wasn't hostile either. You mean it? You actually believe this will work? I do. Well, Seraphina turned to Valerius, I suppose I can see the appeal. She's got fire. More interesting than the usual political brides, certainly. Valerius had been silent throughout the exchange, letting Brynn speak for herself. Now he said quietly, I didn't refuse the bonding lightly. I respect the Western Territories and the effort your court put into these negotiations, but I cannot bond myself to someone I don't choose. Not again. Again? Seraphina's expression sharpened. Right? Your first marriage. I'd forgotten. That was a disaster, wasn't it? It was unfair to everyone involved. I won't repeat it. One of the other vampires in the delegation, an older man with a calculating gaze, spoke up. If you refuse the Lady Seraphina, what assurance do we have that the Eastern Territories will honor our alliance? You have my word, Valerius said, and I'm willing to negotiate new terms. Trade advantages, military support, open borders, everything except a bonding I don't want. It's not the same, the man argued. Blood ties cannot be broken. Economics and military agreements can. Then we'll build trust another way, slowly, over time, through actions rather than bloodlines. That could take decades. I have decades. So do all of you. The delegation conferred quietly among themselves. Finally, Serafina spoke. I'll take your proposal back to our king. I can't promise he'll accept it, but I'll argue in your favor. Valerius bowed, a gesture of respect between equals. Thank you. Serafina looked at Brynn. For what it's worth, I hope you survive what you've chosen. The life of a vampire's companion is not easy, even when the vampire in question is smitten. I'll manage, Brynn said. Yes, Serafina said thoughtfully. I believe you might. After the delegation left, Valerius pulled Brynn into his arms and held her tightly. That was incredibly brave and incredibly foolish. Did it help? I think it might have. Serafina seemed impressed. If she argues for new terms, her king will listen. So maybe it'll be okay. Maybe. He kissed her forehead. But even if it's not, you're worth whatever comes. The negotiations took another month. During that time, Brynn and Valerius continued building their life together. She stayed in his chambers sometimes, fell asleep surrounded by centuries of accumulated history. He came to family dinners and charmed the aunts and proved remarkably adept at helping with dishes. Marcus at work noticed she seemed happier, lighter. The boyfriend's working out? He is, Brynn confirmed. It's been an adjustment, but I think we're figuring it out. Good. You deserve that. She did feel like she deserved it, which was new. For years after her parents died, she'd felt like she was just going through the motions, waiting for life to feel real again. Now it did. Everything was sharper, more vivid. She was happy. Finally, word came from the Western Territories. They'd agreed to the new terms. No bonding required, just a comprehensive trade agreement and a promise of mutual defense. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold. It's over? Brynn asked when Valerius told her. This part, yes. The council still isn't thrilled with me choosing a human, but they'll adapt. We have time now. Time to figure out what we want. I know what I want. He looked at her intently. Tell me. You. This. Whatever it looks like. She took a breath. And I want to turn, not right away. I want to finish some projects at work, spend more time with the aunts while I'm still aging normally. But eventually, yes, I want forever with you. Valerius closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, they were bright with emotion. You're certain? I'm certain. I love you. I want to build a life with you, a long one. I love you, he said fiercely. I will spend eternity proving I'm worthy of this. You already are. They were married 6 months later in a quiet ceremony with the aunts and Caspian and a handful of trusted court members. Brynn wore Claire's wedding dress, altered to fit. Valerius wore black and silver and looked like every fantasy she'd never let herself have. The aunts cried. Even Margaret, usually so practical, dissolved into happy tears. We knew, she whispered to Brynn before the ceremony. From the first night, we knew he was special. You're taking credit for this? Absolutely. Best matchmaking decision we ever made. Brynn turned 2 years after the wedding. It was her choice and her timing. She'd finished the major projects at work, spent long evenings with the aunts preparing them, made peace with the human life she was leaving behind. Valerius turned her in their chambers, careful and controlled, and stayed with her through the 3 days of transformation. When she woke, the world was different, sharper, clearer, overwhelming in its intensity. And Valerius was there, holding her, guiding her through the adjustment. The aunts adapted. They were remarkable that way. They learned about vampire dietary needs and adjusted their dinner invitations accordingly. They aged gracefully while Brynn stopped aging at all, and they never made her feel guilty about it. We're just glad you're happy, Rosemary said when Brynn tried to apologize for leaving them behind eventually. That's all we ever wanted. I'll miss you when you're gone. We're not gone yet, and we'll have had wonderful lives. That's enough. 20 years after they met, Brynn and Valerius hosted a large family dinner. The aunts were elderly now, but still sharp, still themselves. The house was full of warmth and noise and love. Afterward, when the dishes were cleared and the aunts had retired to the sitting room with tea, Margaret looked at Valerius and Brynn with satisfaction. "You know," she said, "we really are quite good at this matchmaking thing." "You absolutely are," Valerius agreed, his arm around Brynn's shoulders. "Should we help Claire's granddaughter next?" Rosemary mused. "Don't you dare," Brynn said, laughing. "Let the poor woman find her own vampire king." "Lightning doesn't strike twice," Claire said philosophically, but Margaret just smiled. "We'll see." They stayed like that long into the evening, warm and whole and together. Brynn rested against Valerius's cool solidity and felt nothing but gratitude for the aunts who'd loved her enough to meddle, for the matchmaking service that had brought them together, for the strange and winding path that had led her here. "Happy?" Valerius murmured against her hair. "Impossibly so," she said, and it was true. Against all odds and logic, the matchmaking scheme had worked. The vampire king had been her date, and somehow, miraculously, they'd built forever from a single blind dinner. Outside, the city hummed with life. Down below in the stone chambers, the court conducted its business. But here, in this warm, bright room full of family and love, Brynn and Valerius existed in a peace they'd both fought for. The aunts had been right from the beginning. She'd met him that night, the man she was meant to find. They just hadn't known he'd be a vampire king or that the love they'd engineered would span centuries. But that was the thing about family and fate and carefully placed matchmaking schemes. Sometimes they worked in ways nobody expected. Sometimes they gave you exactly what you needed, even when you didn't know you were looking. Brynn looked around the room at the people who'd made this possible and felt her heart, vampire though it now was, overflow with affection. "Thank you," she said quietly to her aunts. They just smiled, pleased as anything, already planning their next intervention. Some things, apparently, were eternal. Love, family, and the absolute certainty of well-meaning relatives who thought they knew best. In this case, they'd been absolutely right.